So when you hear the word irrational, what do you think, besides Aaron Brown? Anything else come to mind? I don't say anything out loud, but here's what I'm getting at. When we hear the word irrational, I don't think we think of good things. I think we think of, stuff like not being reasonable, not being logical, not making sense. Irrational doesn't have good definitions to it. And being irrational is really contrary to our heritage, because think about it, we're Methodists, right? And Methodists mean we have a method. That name comes from a guy named John Wesley, who 250 years ago started this movement, and he was so methodical about his faith, him and his friends. I mean, they were passionate, but they were very logical, very rational, and so as a derogatory term, the people that looked at him said, you guys are just so Methodist, And John Wesley didn't mind, though, because he's like, look, we're changing the world, with a faith that is thought out, a faith that is passionately felt. We're changing the world. Logical, reasonable, whatever you want to call us, but irrational? Here's the thing, though. John Wesley may not like the word and some of the other definitions, but I think he would like what we're talking about today because we're talking about how generosity is irrational. If you think about it, it doesn't necessarily make sense. So I want to pause for just a minute and invite you to do two things. One is to jot down some notes. Remember, one of the reasons that you're here today is not for you, that somehow you're here in order to be a messenger, to share some good news with somebody else, and sometimes having taken some notes will help you do that. Second thing I encourage you to do every week is use the study guide. There's a study guide in your program. There's a more detailed study guide on our website. It's all meant for us to do one thing, and that is open the book for ourselves. Don't take my word for it. Open the book, read, listen, see how God is speaking to you. Irrational generosity. Now, I'm going to talk about generosity, but I want you to know that you are already one of the most generous churches around. It's incredible to see what you do. We're known as a very generous church. I had two ministry leaders just a couple weeks ago in just a variety of ways say, Aaron, do you know how generous St. Paul's is seen in our community? I was at an event with pastors in St. Louis about a month ago, and one of them was just chatting in a group. He said, Aaron, one of the things I remember about you and your church is that right after the tornado, you came and spoke at the annual conference in Springfield, and you brought, as a part of your talk, you brought a check and donated it to the conference for $3,200 for water filters for Haiti because they'd had an earthquake there. Remember that? And that was 10 days after the tornado hit, and we donated $3,200 to, I remember that, your generosity, your church's generosity in the middle of a very, very difficult time. We're known for our generosity toward watered gardens and bright futures and Ascent Recovery and cross lines. So here's what I'm getting at in saying all that. You're already a generous church. So this isn't about twisting your arm to get you to be more generous. But here's the thing. If we don't talk about what generosity looks like, it can kind of begin to fade out of our minds and our practices in our lives. So we got to come back around to this and remind ourselves why. Why generosity? We also have to remind ourselves that it is irrational. So here's how I want to dig a little deeper in this. I came across a phrase that kind of just stuck in my head that I want us to unpack. Here's the phrase. Most Americans don't feel rich, and we are. Most Americans think we are generous, and we aren't. Let's unpack that for a minute. Most Americans don't feel rich, and we are. Now, why is it that most of us don't feel rich? I think the answer is probably because there's already somebody richer than us, right? And so we look at people that have more than us and live different lifestyles than we do, and we think, well, I don't have much because they have so much. But when we look at people that have less than us, we should feel so rich and so blessed. For example, here's a scenario. Maybe this happened to you last week, or maybe it'll happen to you today. I mean, you get in your car, go to your favorite restaurant. By the way, owning a car puts you in the top 5% of all people in the world in terms of wealth and economic prosperity. So just to have a car, you're in the top 5%. So you get in your car, you heading to your favorite restaurant, you pass 5 or 6 other restaurants, which is pretty wild too if you think about it in the grand scheme, to get to your favorite one. Maybe you're a little bit miffed because you got to wait 5 minutes, but when you get into your favorite restaurant, you have the menu, you have someone serving you, you open up that menu, you order food, the food is brought to you, you enjoy that food, some of your favorite things. Anybody getting hungry just thinking about that? You enjoy your favorite things. Somebody cleans that all up. You pay for it without really batting an eye. And then you get back in your car and you drive home. And if you're like me, when you get home, you push a button. And what happens? Door opens and you drive your car into its own house. Think about that. Think about that. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? We like buttons. Buttons are a sign of wealth. So you get to your house, and it's a little chilly. Ooh, what do? You push a button and make it warmer. Climate control. Wow. Think about how wealthy that makes us. And then, can I be real for a minute? I'm going to be offensive, but I don't mean to be offensive. It just comes natural to me. So, when you take care of your business, you got to go to the bathroom. You push a button and it goes away. If you are not giving thanks for the fact that you push a button and all that business goes away, you have missed an opportunity for great gratitude. Because you know what happens in most people's lives around the world? There's no button to push. They take care of their business and it's in a hole and it stays in the hole. Think about that. That's how wealthy we are. That's how rich we are. And then you get up in the morning and you go to your closet. And what do you see? Clothes, wall to wall. Some of us have 2 stories of clothes. Oh, wow. I mean, these are signs, right? That sometimes we forget that, we can always think, well, I'm not rich. When we look at people who have more, and there are always people who have more, but when we look at the rest of the world, we're rich. We're rich. We need to make sure that we know that. That's just an important marker that we need to know. But here's the other side of that statement. Remember, if you ask the average American, are you generous? They're going to say, yes, I am. So we don't think we're rich when we are. We do think we're generous when we are not. The average American actually gives away only 2.5, 2.8% of what they make. And if you're really blessed with wealth, your percentage goes down, according to statistics. And here's what I found really kind of heartbreaking a little bit. I read this last week. Fewer and fewer Americans actually give anything to charitable organizations. It's an unhealthy trend in our country. But that's not what we do. As Jesus followers, we do something different. We lead the way in irrational generosity because we truly believe that it's more blessed to give than to receive. And why do we believe that? Well, because that's what Jesus taught and that's what Jesus modeled for us. Now, here's the other part of this whole equation. Even when we have a hard time giving, we all would say, I'd love to give what? More. I'd love to give more. I just can't. And the reason that we don't feel like we can give is that at the heart of that is something called a scarcity mindset that I want to talk about. And I get a scarcity mindset because that's how I was raised. And nothing bad toward my parents or anything, but, we didn't talk about money in our house when we were growing up, but there was always this undercurrent that, we had to be careful, and there wasn't enough. And oftentimes, we got that impression that there was more month than money. You know what I'm talking about? So we had that scarcity mindset, and it's actually not just a mindset, it's a cycle that if we can identify, we can kind of take it apart. So the scarcity cycle looks like this. First of all, God provides. This is important, that everything we have, is somehow come from God. Our ability to work, our ability to do everything, it all comes from God, to develop resources and to make money. But in the scarcity mindset, the first step is after we receive from God is we consume. That at the end of the month, after we consume all that, we're like, oh my gosh, there's not enough money left over. So then we lack. Whenever we consume and we don't have enough, that's a dominant emotion that is led to is the emotion of fear. So you can kind of see the cycle, right? We consume. Because we consume everything, we think it's all ours to consume. We lack, we fear, then what do? We start the cycle all over again. And you can hear it in how we talk, the scarcity mindset. I wish we could do more, but we can't. I never seem to get ahead. No matter what I do, there's just never enough. It's a cycle of scarcity. It's a scarcity mindset. But as Jesus followers, we have a totally different mindset. Because of what God did through Jesus, we do something different first. And when we do something different first, the whole cycle changes. That is so key. What we do first changes the cycle. In fact, Paul talks about this. It's the cycle of supply or the cycle of abundance. Paul talks about this in a scripture. He's referring to the concept of planting seeds. Those of you that are gardeners or farmers, you'll really resonate with this. Here's how Paul puts it. Remember this. A farmer who only plants a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. You must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure, for God loves a person who gives cheerfully, and God will generously provide all you need. Then you'll always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. For God is the one who provides seed for the farmer, then bread to eat. In the same way, He will provide an increase your resources and then produce a great harvest of generosity in you. Yes, you will be enriched in every way so that you can always be generous. It's the cycle of supply. And it's not rational, it's irrational. And here's what I mean. Here's the graphic. So starts off as the same scarcity cycle, God supplies, but the first step in the cycle of abundance is that we give first. We give cheerfully, Paul says. We give joyfully, not under pressure. We really believe that it's a massive blessing to be able to be generous in as many ways as possible. We're generous, we give because God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, right? We give. And when we give, what does God do? Well, in this cycle, God multiplies it. Paul talked about how when you put a seed in the ground, you put one seed in the ground, it doesn't produce one seed. You put one seed in the ground and it produces many other seeds, much more grain than you ever put into the ground. God multiplies what we give. Then what happens is our faith grows. And suddenly what do? Well, we give more. God multiplies more, our faith grows more, so we give more. You see how the cycle is completely different. If you're in the cycle of scarcity, what's most important, if you're sitting here thinking, I can tell you which one I'm in, and it's not the cycle of abundance. If you're in that cycle of scarcity and you're saying, I don't want to be there anymore, the thing you've got to do is change the first part of the cycle. Change the first part of the cycle. Instead of consume first, you choose to give first. And this is where it'll make you nervous. It'll make you scared. It'll make you doubt. First, we worship God. Now, how do we do that? How do we give first? Well, our ancient ancestors said we tithe. This is how we do the first part of giving. We tithe. And that word tithe that comes from the Hebrew word ma'aser, which means a tenth. It means a tenth. 1/10 of everything that comes to us, we give back to God as an act of worship. It's the first thing that we return. God, I see what you put in my life, and I return 1/10 of what you have given to me. Then God multiplies it, builds our faith. We're able to then continue the cycle, creates a harvest of generosity in us. And whenever I talk about tithing, I always feel like there are a lot of questions that come up that I think we need to answer because this is an important thing to really get our minds and our hearts around. So ask some questions here. What does the tithe do? That 10%. First thing is this. It teaches us to put God first. When you tithe first, it teaches us to put God first. And the Scriptures tell us this just straight up. Exactly those words. This is Deuteronomy 14 in the Old Testament. The purpose of tithing is to teach you to always put God first in your lives. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, this is scary. I mean, things are tight. I don't want to do this. Aaron, for me to tithe, that would take me rearranging my whole life. Are you telling me to do that? Absolutely. Yes, I am. You think to do that, it would take crazy faith. Is that what you're talking about, Aaron? Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Why? Because it takes faith to give first. It doesn't take faith to give last. Tithing, every time I receive an increase from God, it reminds me in a very tangible way, God, because of what you did for me, this is my honor. It's my privilege. It's my joy to give back to you. I've rearranged my life. I've reprioritized my life so that, God, you are first. You're first. Tithing teaches us to put God first. Another thing that tithing does is that it builds our faith. So we see the faithfulness of God, and we see this in a little phrase. It comes from the book of Malachi. You may have heard this before. It's from the Old Testament. And God is speaking here through the prophet. It says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse, so there will be enough food in my temple. If you do this, I'll open up the windows of heaven for you. I'll pour out a blessing so great that you won't have enough room to take it in. Try me, put me to the test. It's the only place in the Bible where God says, test me. Only place where God says, try me on this. God's saying, see if my economy is different than the world's. The world says consume and lack and fear and consume and lack and fear. See if when you give to me first, I don't multiply it and build your faith and suddenly create a harvest of generosity. God's saying, give me your first and your best, and I will bless the rest. God is saying, see if 90% of my blessings, 90%, living off of 90% of what you have doesn't actually go further than living on 100%. You'll start with the tithe. You see the blessings of God, and you want to bless even further. You want to do even more. Suddenly, you're rearranging your whole life, recognizing that what God's given to you actually is not all for you. You see an impact that is made in the world when all this happens. And I've seen this happen. You probably have too. That, seeing God work is pretty amazing. And not holding on to it, being generous, even in the most difficult circumstances. In 2008, you remember what happened in 2007, 2008? The beginning of the Great Recession. Did that affect anybody? Yeah. Here's the thing, as a church, we did not hunker down and say, all right, times are tight, we're going to keep more of what we have for ourselves. During the Great Recession, we decided, no, we're going to be even more generous because some of our ministry partners were really struggling. And that's when we decided, okay, we got to make sure that they are able to keep doing what they are doing. We became even more generous. We stepped up our work with them. We helped, of course, in the middle of all that, we helped rebuild after the tornado. And in that same span of time, we paid off all our debt. We've been debt-free ever since. That's in that same span of time, 2008, 9, 10, 11. That's when we raised $250,000 to build 50 homes in Nicaragua. That's irrational. But that's why I tell you as a church, and I mean it, that we will lead the way in irrational generosity because we believe it. It's literally more blessed to give than to receive. I got to tell you what happened to me this last week. So I was in Los Angeles at a conference, and it wasn't a Christian conference. It was a leadership conference with John Maxwell. Some of you may recognize that name. He's kind of a leadership expert in the United States. And I was invited to go to this, and so I went. And part of the conference was they sent out an invitation to say, hey, if anybody that's attending the conference wants to do a Shark Tank pitch in front of Barbara Corcoran. I don't know if you know Barbara Corcoran or watch Shark Tank. She's one of the sharks. If you want to do a pitch for your favorite nonprofit in front of Barbara and John Maxwell, fill out this application, and the winner of the pitch will get $20,000 for their favorite nonprofit. So I had conflicting thoughts because I'm thinking, I don't want to go to a conference and work, right? I kind of want to just sit and absorb. But I thought, well, if I have a chance to get $20,000 for a nonprofit that I believe in, I'm going to give it a try. So I sat down with Teddy Steen, who is a director of Ascent Recovery Residences, and I said, Teddy, help me fill this out. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to give it a try. So she and I sat down. We had to actually create a video that we sent in, just kind of like Shark Tank people do, and got all that ready. It was a pretty elaborate process. Sent it in like, all right, who knows? Well, I got a call just about a week before the conference saying, you've been chosen to be one of the 3 people that will pitch their nonprofit in front of Barbara Corcoran and John Maxwell. So, okay, it gets better. It gets worse, and then it gets better. So I'm at the conference. I got to tell you, preparing to, and it was a 2-minute long pitch. You had 2 minutes to do your pitch so for Ascent Recovery, 2 minutes to kind of sum up what we do, what we believe in there. And I got to tell you, I've never been as nervous as I was there. I mean, to have the 2 of them sitting, 5 feet away, staring at me, and done this in front of the entire conference of people that was there. 2 minutes is not my time frame as a preacher. And then for there to be $20,000 on the line, I have never felt that much pressure. My heart rate was probably 150, 160, 170. I could not calm myself down. And so 3 of us presented. I was the third. Joe was the first presenter. And get this, he presented a nonprofit that is creating 3D printed baby hearts for children with heart problems. I'm like, wow, give it to him, you know? That's awesome. And I presented second for Ascent Recovery. The third presenter was a guy named Scott Tolar, and he presented for a community center for adults with mental disabilities. And he presented for that. And I'm like, gosh, that's great too. You know, give it to him, you know? So we had the three presenters that stood up and did this, 2 minutes each, a couple questions after that. And then Barbara Corn and John had a quick conversation, and they picked one of us. And so we got a picture. Well, no, don't put it up yet. Don't put it up yet. So Barbara Cacorn walks over to the three of us, and she says, I'm going to shake the hand of the one who's won the $20,000. And she kind of goes down, and she shakes Scott's hand. He's the one who proposed for the community center for adults with mental disabilities. So everybody cheers. It's all great. And then the magic happened. So Scott stood there, and after the clapping subsided, he said, I've got a proposal. He said, you know, back in my home city, there's a matching grant. So rather than take this $20,000 for myself, I'll just take 10, and I'll give 5 to the other 2 people who made a pitch. And that way my 10 still becomes $20,000. I'm like, wow, how cool is that? I mean, how generosity, right? Then it gets better. Then Barbara Cacorn steps up and says, wait a second. You keep your $20,000, it'll become $40,000. I'll personally give $10,000 each to these other 2 presenters. Gets better. John Maxwell stands up and said, I'll match your 10. I'll give each of these 2 $10,000 also. So instead of one person getting 20, one person got 20 that becomes 40, the other 2 get $20,000 each. $20,000 became $80,000 like that. Why? Because Scott Tolar said, my first response when I receive this blessing is not to keep it and consume it, but to give it. Right there, the cycle of generosity. If you're sitting there thinking, oh, that's just a bunch of hooey, what it and all, I just saw it happen with my own 2 eyes. And so did a whole bunch of other people. You see, these things happen. It's a literal process and cycle that we can live within if we choose to live within, and our faith gets built. The tithe that puts God's first, it helps us build our faith. Third thing that happens is that it provides for the work of God's church. When we tithe, you return 10% into God's church, and a lot gets done. Back to that passage from Malachi. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. I mean, don't raise your hand, but how many of you would say that your life is spiritually different because of God's work in this church? What happens? Spiritual food and a house make a difference. Somebody else gave. The work of God goes on. Your life is impacted. This is what we do. This is what we do. Share a couple quick stories with you. 2 years ago, we launched a new ministry called Celebrate Recovery. So far, we have reached 111 people that are taking part in that. We average 59 adults on Monday nights right here at this campus. And people come here. They're seeking. Well, what is Celebrate Recovery? It's people seeking to overcome their hurts, their habits, their hang-ups. We're talking about grief and broken relationships and depression and addiction. And while the adults are in small groups, really focusing on those recovery issues, the children are also in small groups. We have curriculum for them to help them overcome some of their issues, because they get swept up in secondary recovery issues. Celebrate Recovery also expanded this last year. Now includes a group specifically for veterans. You know, celebrating Veterans Day today. I think it's important that we recognize that. It has become our fastest growing group within Celebrate Recovery. In fact, I want you to hear from one of our veterans, one of our Celebrate Recovery participants. His name is Steve Thomas. Take a look.
Went in 1987. I got out January of 1991. I was in the United States Navy. I'm proud that I served my country. It was interesting. My addiction started prior to me going to the military, but I didn't realize that I was an addict then, until I actually came back. But as a veteran, the VA has been good to me, because I probably wouldn't be here today. After 35 years, I went to prison in the midst of that. Got through that. So made a decision to live today. And through Celebrate Recovery, I had that. I've been having that opportunity, through St. Paul's Church, having to Celebrate Recovery. I always had a spiritual foundation. It was just the fact that I didn't surrender. I'm clean and sober, got 6 months clean. Got my spiritual foundation back with the Lord. I do a lot of service work. I do a lot of giving back. I'm loving myself again. I help Pastor Rick out do a lot of volunteering over at St. Paul and Carl Junction. Things that I didn't do, because I didn't do a lot for my kids, So I try to do a lot of things for kids today because my children only seen me and my addiction. But the kids today, they don't have to see that. And I'm very proud of that as well. My family has been restored to me. They trusted me again, depending on me again, like talking to me again. So it's been good. God been good to me. That's who I give all praise and credit to. It ain't nothing I did. It's all what the goodness of what the Lord has did for me. Windows of heaven been open, and I'm grateful for that today.
Isn't that amazing? How is that possible? I mean, that's one story of many. Actually, we're in a place now where we need more vans. So many of the people that we're reaching in Celebrate Recovery can't get here in their own car. They don't have cars. They don't have transportation to get here. So we're providing van ministry. We need more vans. We need more van drivers to help that happen, especially as that veterans community continues to grow. Why do we do that? Because that's what we do. That's what irrational generosity makes happen when we say, all right, God, we're going to give you what is yours first. Over the last month, we've had 2 different hurricanes that hit Florida. As a church, we've given just a little less than $10,000 to help out, help rebuild. Those have gone directly, that money has gone directly to 2 churches that are helping people in all kinds of different ways. I asked our pastor of caring ministries, how many families have we helped this year locally? She said 58 so far. 58 families right here, helping with utilities and medication, rent, food, gas, other basic needs. We're gearing up for our Thanksgiving baskets, to help needy families there. Our affordable Christmas is one of the best things that we do. And none of that is just a handout. All of it's meant to build relationships, right? It's at the heart of that. All of it is meant to build dignity in people that are in need. That's what we do. That's what we do. Why do we do it? Well, because of what He did for us. This is what we do. So I have no problem talking about generosity and telling you that Janet and I chose to tithe 25 years ago. We just see what happens. And I would just say, why would you want any other way of life? And if you're in that cycle of scarcity, take a different next first step in the cycle changes. That's what we do. That's what we do. So here's how I would end. I would say, that's what we do. Are you a part of the we? Or are you stuck in the cycle of scarcity? Consuming, lacking, fearful? If that's you, start a different cycle, the cycle of abundance. It makes no sense in the natural world. It's supernatural. It's not logical. It's illogical. It's not rational. It's irrational. We give. God multiplies. Faith grows. We give more. Why? Because God first gave to us. Because of what God did. Next week is Commitment Sunday. You've got that commitment card that's there in your program, and think about it. That's why that's there. It's not for today. It's for next week. Think about that. Pray about it. We have to be intentional about these sorts of things and practice the cycle. And maybe for some of you, filling out that pledge card, that commitment card, is the first step in a new cycle of abundance for you. It's right there in your hand. If you're a member of St. Paul's already, you've already said, I'm going to fill one of these out every year. I'm going to think it through, pray it through, talk it through with my family. But next week we make those commitments. So what does it look like for you to be irrational in your generosity. I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like being blessed in order to be a blessing. It starts with the first choice. And for today, that's the good news. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Let's pray together. God, thank you for being so generous to us. Maybe what we need most, Lord, is courage. Courage to take that first step that seems so irrational, to give first rather than consume first. Convict us of that, Lord. Show us the power of your economy. We are grateful for how you work, how you move, the changes in life that you bring. In Jesus' name, amen.